Osio, Halito, Chumachukma, what's up, everybody? Got a special treat today. You see, we got brother Ishmael, cause that's my cousin, y'all, brother Ishmael. We got Uncle Waldo here. We got Jmar that will be joining us shortly. What's up, everybody? Shout out to all you beautiful ones in the chat. I hope everything is healthy. It's a beautiful day in Indian country. This is part two. I know it's a little long overdue, but we have a life happening in the interim, and we want to make sure we on top of everything that we're supposed to be on top of. Um, Hope all is well. Lots of things happening. We probably gonna have to do an urban Indian country news some point, and kind of run through some of the things um, that are important to American Indians and going forward. That's for sure. Some of the buttons that are being pushed, some of the chess moves that are being made, and we're going to see what the gains and pros and cons are and things of that nature. But this is part two. This here is part two of a series that we'll be doing, that we're going to be doing. Don't know how long, because we're not going to run out of content, especially when it comes to that, the many things that we learned and we're able to get different things out of from the Chief Warhorse videos with Tom Ackland. That's for sure. Spicy meatballs. The numbers on those videos are still going up because the content is fire, for one. Just the information that Tom was disclosing. It's just amazing. And now you are able to put together how exactly that affected the rest of us, how it affected Chief Warhorse and her people, and some of the power that white supremacists and the KKK have obtained, and how they abuse it and utilize it, and how somehow the colonizer became the chief. And this is going to be part two, and this is how white people became the minority. Welcome, Cousin Ish. How you doing?
Doing well, Cousin Phoenix. How you doing this evening? Peace, everybody.
I'm all right. I'm just peachy without the pits. I'm happy to be alive. I ain't complaining.
It's so good to see you. So good to see you and everybody else out there. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
So Jmar is going to be with us shortly. I certainly hope Mr. Willow comes back. But yeah, let's dive in. Like Angola, I think that's where we left off at. Tom Ackland and his family and the ties that bind. And we're still going to get into how, and there's so much to unpack, specifically because of the damage that the Confederacy and the things that, we've been exposed to but haven't been told or talked about. And this is exactly where the money bags lay, and the direct confirmation of the people that were wicked now are related to the same folks that were wicked back then. And this is how the Indian got. So many different myriad of stories. We still sticking with Franklin and Armfield, Isaac Franklin, of course, the Ackland family, and just corrupt politicians. How they benefited and profited off of Angola prison. I think that should be the first place that we dig into, specifically because they want to send children there. These some things that just need to end. So when we think that slavery ended in 1865, it absolutely did not. And between Angola and other jails and that have been privatized with these prisons in Mississippi and other places, that these same families have these plantations, have been able to monetize along with foreign people as well. So, Cousin Ish, what you got on Angola?
For sure. Just laying the premise and the framework of kind of a part of the topic tonight. I just posted up on my website, firsttribenation.com. It's going to be a part of the book that I'm releasing. The name of the book is Whispers of Our Ancestors, From Resistance to Resilience, An Untold Legacy of Indigenous Peoples, Volume 1. And I'm just going to read what that part of it is, because it's dealing with the Angola plantation. And what it's going to read is, I also got the link to today's show on there also, so everybody can make sure that they get their link and also circulate it. Thumbs up, and please share the video. Well, for the Angola, it states that Angola prison in Louisiana is steeped in a history of slavery, racism, and the prison industrial complex. Today, Angola is the largest maximum security prison in the United States, housing over 6,000 incarcerated people. However, the roots of this prison can be traced back to the antebellum era, when the land that is now comprises Angola was used as a slave plantation. In the early 19th century, the land would be eventually become Angola prison was owned by Isaac Franklin and John Armfield, two slave traders who specialized in the interstate slave trade. They operated a massive slave trading company based in Alexandria, Virginia, and their plantation in Louisiana called Angola served as a holding facility for enslaved people before they were shipped to other parts of the country. The Angola plantation was notorious for its brutal conditions, with enslaved people forced to work long hours in the fields. Just to give you an indication, they were only allowed Sundays off, and even had them work in some parts of even Sunday. That's just a fact. Let me go back to this part. Subjected to physical and sexual abuse, and often punished severely for even minor infractions. Many enslaved people died on the plantation from disease, overwork, and mistreatment. After the Civil War, the Angola plantation was purchased by the state of Louisiana and converted into a prison. At first, the prison housed primarily white inmates, but as the convict lease system took hold in the late 19th to early 20th century, the majority of the prisons at Angola became black men, often leased out to private companies to work in dangerous and grueling conditions. Under the convict lease system, private companies paid the state to lease the labor of incarcerated people who were forced to work in mines, on railroads, and in other hazardous jobs with little or no pay or protection. This system was rife with abuse and corruption, and Angola prison was no exception. Inmates in Angola were subject to forced labor, corporal punishment, and brutal living conditions. In the mid-20th century, a series of lawsuits and political pressure led to the end of the convict lease system, but Angola remained a brutal and violent place. In the 1970s, a group of incarcerated people in Angola organized a protest to demand better living conditions and an end to the violence perpetrated by guards. The protest was violently suppressed, and many of the organizers were punished severely. Today, Angola prison remains one of the most notorious prisons in the United States, with a long history of violence and abuse and neglect. Although efforts have been made in recent years to improve conditions at Angola, a legacy of slavery and the convict lease system continues to shape the lives of incarcerated people at the prison. The story of Angola prison is a stark reminder of the ways in which the legacy of slavery continues to shape the United States criminal justice system, and its root as a brutal slave plantation to its use as a convict leasing facility and its current incarnation as a maximum security prison. Angola has been a site of profound violence and oppression as we grapple with the ongoing injustices of mass incarceration and police brutality. It is important to remember that the deep historical roots of these issues and work towards a more just and equitable future. Everything that's on here is sourced out. Every source reference will be placed on throughout the entire book. Also, I give additional statistics about Angola being the maximum security prison, the largest maximum security prison in the United States, with the population and the numbers. So this is just a part of what we're dropping and laying the framework of a part of what we're dealing with tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Cousin Ish. I have an actual petition. That Franklin and Armfield must have been pretty messy. I have a petition coming out of District of Columbia, which they used to call Washington County at this time, August 25th, 1830. Um, and this is it's the beginning greeting, a salutation to the honorable justices of Circuit Court of the United States for the District of Columbia and for the County of Washington, sitting as Court of Chancery. Robert Beale seeks to settle a title dispute regarding Rachel, a slave. Beale was appointed by Benjamin Berry, deceased, as trustee of a life estate for Eleanor Berry. Bill states that Eleanor Berry, without legal authority, sold the estate's cattle, sheep, and hogs, along with 20 of the slaves, including Rachel. Rachel, who was sold to Henry Waring, who has since sold Rachel by some pretended bargain and contract with Franklin and Armfield, a large domestic slave trading business. Bill seeks an injunction preventing Eleanor Berry, Waring, and Franklin and Armfield from removing Rachel from the jurisdiction of the court and asks the court to subpoena all of the defendants. So they were trying to remove people into the jurisdiction of Angola, into the Louisiana jurisdiction where their Natchez office was, in order to perpetuate this. So by hook or crook. So now I'm sure that there was also, again, some free people of color that were already emancipated that would have got caught in this web of how they can satisfy their thirst for perpetuating slavery. This was their bread and butter. So their domestic slave trade completely exceeded any stories of how many Africans may have came here in the entire 350 years of slavery. Franklin and Armfield is responsible for 2/3, if not more, of that. And that was the goal. And they privatized the prisons. So they were doing this long after, of course, the Civil War. And they've been perpetuating as they play both sides. So what's so interesting about this is that we were able to take a different look at the approach. Instead of choosing a side, you can kind of see where they are both playing us to the middle. And what I mean by that, the Confederate, the Union, they were both the same sandwich, perpetuating a facade. Meanwhile, everybody was walking away with the bag. Not only were they walking away with the bag, this is also the development of the implementation of how white people were going to turn themselves into a minority. After stealing all the land and all these other things, of course, that were held in trust for the American Indians. Now they became the American Indians. They couldn't become the American Indians. You got to have at least one Negro to qualify for that. One person of color, some people of color to qualify for that, which case these people are now Native Americans. So let me make that clear. Which also changed the legal definition, because if you've seen any of the law books, the original definition calls a native a natural serf or denizen, citizen by domicile, not necessarily by birthright, right? So now Native American is someone that's federally recognized as a Native American. We're the American Indians. So I really don't know how that works. Well, we're getting to the bottom of how it works. And it starts with the politics, for sure. And a lot of people have tried to separate us from the politics, which has been much to our detriment, in which case we've trusted other people to handle different things and come up with solutions. And we haven't had any panacea, because little did we know these people ain't us. They're not the same folk. All skin folk are not kinfolk. And coming to this realization, it looks like what's the most powerful thing here in the country is now like a grassroots movement, right? With our political situation here, based off the land that we're entitled to, the land that we actually own throughout our family's history, entitles us to some act right and some respect politically, specifically because you could not even be an elector, and we're supposed to be electors. This is why it wasn't important that an Indian would ever be elected to be president or anything, because we were still supposed to be very involved in the commercial affairs going forward, and Congress was supposed to be handling us. So we've had some pretty neglectful situations where we can prove where the government has neglected to protect us. Also, where the hostile takeover was, where we have now can prove that white people have turned themselves into the Indian, or the Native American now. And then they try to discredit us as American Indians so that they can continue to perpetuate the fraud. You posted a link, cousin, in the back chat. What's this? Did you want to play that? You can do the screen share if you wanted. Is that something you wanted to do?
For sure. That's no problem at all. Yeah, I know that, one of the weapons that were used in that situation were the application of the black codes. So I'd like to kind of unpack that, because the black codes were one of those major weapons that were used to make Indians colored, make Indians black, and enslave the African populations by something that was spilled over. So I'd like to add a context to that, if I may.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just go here and do the presentation so we can get that part of it shared up for you. Okay, can you see my screen okay? Okay.
Then there's another question related to.
Can y'all hear that okay?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
This, which is, here's a freed family in the fields picking cotton. Okay, this is the ideal for.
I think this is a different version of the. Hold on, just one second. Let me get the right one for you. No problem.
Sure.
Okay. What we're looking for is how the black codes were being applied to the people. So first, we'll deal with this Angola. Let's do this Angola drop here. This reads as 37 years of solitary confinement for the Angola 3. In 1972, 3 men in Louisiana were placed in solitary confinement after a prison guard was murdered. 2 of them are still there, even though many believe that they are innocent. Now, even the wife of the security guard is saying that this is ridiculous, but this is what's going on in Angola prison right now.
Maybe 4 or 5 steps the length of the cell, and about 3 steps width,
And these men, I mean, if they did not do this, and I believe that they didn't, they have been living a nightmare for 36 years.
I don't know of any place in the world where people are held in solitary confinement for over 3 decades.
So that my cause then and now was noble. It might bend me a little bit. It may cause me a lot of pain. It may even take my life. But it will never be able to break me. We're fighting for the people to understand that we will.
This call originates from a Louisiana correctional facility and may be recorded or monitored.
That we would fail for murder, that we are totally and completely and actually innocent.
You have 15 seconds left on this call.
Let me call you back.
So that's that, dealing with 37 years of solitary confinement. We're talking about 23 hours locked down, out for one hour possibly. So in this article also deals with Angola prison, the state penitentiary of Louisiana, being the largest prison in America, built on the site of the former slave plantation. And it goes through the whole history of Angola. So I'll make sure that I post a link up in the chat for everybody to click on to it. And again, that's dealing with Angola right now today. It's an atrocity.
Yes, it is. That is definitely a big blow that needs to be knocked down. Now, cousin, you also the black codes. Can you touch on them? And their give us a little history on the black codes and when did they start us? Somewhere in the 1600s, maybe.
For sure. Yeah, dealing with the black codes itself. What happened with the black codes is the history of the United States is intertwined with the history of France in many ways, including the creation of the black codes, which are set of laws governing the treatment and status of enslaved black people in the southern states. However, what's often overlooked is the connection between the black codes and a similar set of laws govern the treatment of enslaved people by the French colonies, known as Code Noir. The Code Noir in this chapter, it explores the Code Noir and how it's applied to the black codes in America. Now, that Code Noir was first enacted by Louis XIV in 1685, and it was intended to govern the treatment of enslaved black people in French colonies in the Caribbean and Louisiana. The code consisted of 60 articles, covering everything from religious instruction to baptism to the use of physical punishment and the regulation of manumission. So again, this started in 1685. Okay, 1685. The Code Noir was one of the first attempts to regulate the treatment of enslaved people, and it served as a model for other European countries that established colonial empires in the following centuries. The Code Noir was heavily influenced by Catholicism, which was the dominant religion in France at the time. The code required that enslaved people be baptized, taught the Catholic faith, and observe religious holidays. It also provided for the punishment of slave owners who failed to provide the religious education of their slaves. Additionally, the Code Noir placed limits on the use of physical punishment, requiring slave owners to obtain permission from a court before inflicting certain forms of punishment. The Code Noir also regulated the relationship between enslaved people and their masters, providing the protection of enslaved women from sexual exploitation and requiring that enslaved people be provided with adequate food, clothing, and medical care. The code also allowed for manumission of enslaved people, though it placed limits on the circumstances under which it would have occurred. So this Code Noir, again, that means black code. Noir means black, and so it's Code Noir. This is where the black codes come from because it was applied to the French colonies. So that just lays the foundation of how it was established again in the 1600s.
Would include like Martinique, Saint Domingue, Montserrat, all of the French colonies, Guyana, even in South America as well, right?
And Haiti, all the French colonies.
Would that
That's
also
right.
include some of Algiers and Morocco as well, in all of the places that the French, that would be Canada, Nova Scotia, and different portions as well. Interesting.
Yes, covering all the French colonies. That's correct.
Even parts of French Mobile, Alabama, because Mobile was separate from the colony of Alabama and the state of Alabama. Mobile was a standalone colony on its own that was actually under French regime, while the other portions of Alabama and Florida's were Spanish. Very interesting, the way that history gets overlooked, especially because it's confusing, because we had Dutch, we had French, we had Spanish, we had British, but at different intervals and sometimes all at the same time. And their confusion that they had in their countries absolutely affected us here in the Americas as well as in the other colonies. Those changes went down. So the Black Codes, again, 1690s, they were implemented in these specific areas that the French dominated. So it's going to be the same in all of the French colonies, even the Western African coast, where they have dominated, and especially at the point of like the 7 years when they were different teams tagging up against Portugal, and then this one and that one. They had some very interesting things going on in Europe that absolutely affected us here in the Americas, and the way that things changed for us throughout the course of history, the way that different wars were provoked, right, with outside interference as well. But one thing I could say, Great Britain left here thinking that, slavery was going to be over in any of the colonies. They certainly thought that, and they kind of left, washing their hands, doing the right thing. And they actually made an apology and offered to restore everyone. And this is before they pulled out. Of course, that didn't happen. And we've had involvement with so many other people. And then even with the Confederates and their relationship with the Rothschilds. right?
Right.
Nathaniel Rothschild, Andrew Jackson, actually the one good thing that we can say that he did do, and he abhorred the idea of the central bank. So the Rothschilds also perpetuated the war with 1812, because now without the bank and them not renewing the charter for the next 20 years, the United States was essentially broke. But what Andrew Jackson did do, by hook or crook, what he did do was actually minimize the national debt without their credit system. So when he came up for election, part of his campaign was no central bank. They did not want the Rothschild, and they were able to, leading up to Lincoln, is why they actually assassinated him, because of the greenbacks and the fact that now the United States would be able to print their own currency, essentially would have minimized and reduced the Rothschild to back to their own countries to do their shenanigans there. But unfortunately, they murked Lincoln. That didn't happen. Andrew Jackson only was able to stall them off for a little while, because they absolutely helped the belligerents in the Civil War as well. And again, this is part of the rabbit hole that comes with the Angola and the Ackland family, and how the colonizers ended up becoming chiefs. All these fascinating details in between, leading up to where we are now. There's so many different threads in history that we've talked about, but not in the capacity of who's responsible then and now, and how they've all benefited these last 2 centuries, right? Because of us not necessarily knowing, how they affected us. We just know that we were affected, but after finding out how, the perpetrator, and who ran off with the bag as a result of it to us.
That was a major connection that you pull up. I mean, like burning tomahawk with that Rothschild's bomb. So nice one on that one. That was real nice. That's gangster. Also, not to be underestimated is the touch of, those black codes being applied in South America. You also have French Guiana and in Mississippi. Now it's heavy in Mississippi because Mississippi, Louisiana, Mobile, those areas of how it was applied, the black codes, it switched into being applied to the American Indians. So I like to highlight that part of it. I would like to make sure that I put up that video that we were trying to get up to. So let me put that on first, and then let's go into how it was being applied to American Indians in those regions. So what we have here is, I'm going to pull up the share so we can pull that out for you. 1 second, cousin. Okay. And then what we have here is, here it is.
Almost immediately, most former rebel states enact harsh laws known as black codes.
The black codes are laws designed to regulate the lives of blacks, in particular to control their movements throughout the South and to force them back onto the plantations as farm laborers working for the white landlords.
Some codes prohibit blacks from owning firearms, buying liquor, or engaging in any trade or business other than farming. The land promised to the freedmen is returned to unrepentant rebels, sentencing blacks to a landless existence for generations to come. Often, white landowners would hire freed slaves to work the harvest, only to chase them off the land when their wages came due. Unable to collect their meager earnings, many blacks starved to death.
Johnson looked the other way as these ex-Confederate governments reimposed stringent controls over the black race through the black codes, which were a de facto form of slavery in that they regulated the daily lives of blacks, much like apartheid in South Africa.
Some states go so far as to legalize the beatings of former slaves who are considered to have misbehaved.
Beating black people who step out of line for, things such as not getting off the sidewalk when you see a white man or white woman walking by. So small infractions are things that can be perceived as shucking that Southern way of life, so to speak.
I'm making this quick
So-
video because it has been 1 month since joining the Cash.
So that's why that part of it is so important. It was because it was these black codes that were being applied to these people, which is where Jim Crow comes from. This is how you ended up getting the Jim Crow laws, as well as the laws that were being applied to quote unquote freedmen, and what was being applied on the Dawes rolls. This is where this is all connecting from. So as we're able to go over this history, you're starting to see where all of these black codes, are coming from and how it's being applied. Now, in putting context to how it was being applied to the American Indian, let's look and see what the facts say on it. How the black codes were applied to make Indians black. In the aftermath of the American Civil War, Southern states sought to maintain a system of racial oppression through the implementation of the black codes. These laws restricted the rights and freedoms of black people, including the ability to travel, work, and own property. However, the impact of the black codes extended beyond the black community to other racial groups, including the American Indian. In particular, many states sought to categorize the American Indian as black in order to subject them to the same restrictions and discriminations as Black Americans. This effort was part of a broader trend in which Southern states sought to categorize all non-white individuals as black in order to subject them to the same oppressive laws and practices to black people. This included the Black Indians, who were often targeted despite their distinct cultural and historical identities. For example, in the state of Mississippi, the Black Code specifically applied, quote, to all freedmen, free Negroes, and mulattoes, unquote. This broad definition effectively categorized all non-white individuals as black, including Native Americans, American Indians who were neither freedmen nor black. As a result, the American Indian in Mississippi were subject to the same restrictions and discriminations as black people, including restrictions on their ability to vote, own property, and travel freely. Similar practices were employed in other Southern states, as well as in some cases, American Indians were forced to identify as black on official documents, even when they didn't identify as such. This has not only subjected them to discrimination and oppression, but also erased their distinct cultural identities and histories. So in this conclusion, the Black Codes were a tool of racial oppression that have far-reaching impacts beyond the Black community. The American Indians were among many groups targeted in these laws, which sought to categorize them as black in order to justify their exclusion from citizenship and subject them to discriminatory practices. These efforts not only perpetrated a system of racial oppression, but also erased the distinct cultural identities and histories of non-white people. So again, you can see how those Black codes were being used in the broader spectrum, being opposed to the American Indians, thus stripping them of their identity and their birthrights in their land.
And then we also have the 1870s, shortly thereafter, the 1866 treaties, prior to the actual Freedmen's Bank even closing, we still have these particular laws that are set up for other people of color to now have political power that the American Indians still doesn't have, which was also like a forced assimilation, right? You have other people of color from different nationalities that here a very short period of time. And then there's the people that came in here dark as Wesley Snipes, but by the time some of these laws were implemented, they are now down to their 1/8 of visible whiteness, in which case they would now be considered free white people, right? Again, and they could have been dark as Wesley Snipes, but by way of their actual lineage and what country they were from and how they were whitening up in their process, this is what they were also able to accomplish. So most of the Negroes that came through here from the different colonies, again, owned by Portugal, Spanish colonies, Italian colonies as well. Those are going to be your people that came into the Americas, particularly the Spanish and French colonies. And then you'll have some of those people that have now had generations with the indigenous people of the Caribbean that have come here, right? So now we also have the intra-American slave trade. And these are your people that are coming in through South Carolina. There are different people that came in through New England, which is going to be your Massachusetts Bay colony. That is directly where Cromwell sent a lot of the Scots to, right? Specifically there. And these are going to be your swarthy Europeans. Also, because of proximity, their first location that they may have been exiled to, that where they would have also met up with the Berbers and the other people that were expelled from Spain and Portugal, down where they where you have Mauritania and all these other areas. But these people that surround the Mediterranean, people neglect to realize that they are still descendants of Europeans. So Africa in itself starts with the Europeans. I know that really sounds strange. And the people that they were actually calling Africans that came into the United States, especially prior to 1815, are not limited to skin color at all. And we know in places like Pennsylvania, that's going to be predominantly where your swarthy Palatines or Germans and French came in. Right. And if you'll see their window of coming into the United States increased in the 1750s. So this would also, it should also be included as your transatlantic slave trade, because it is. They sailed from those places in England across the Atlantic, which would qualify them for the transatlantic slave trade. Certainly not those tens of millions of people, 12 million people plus or whatever astronomical numbers that they lied about. No, not here in North America. In fact, the numbers are shriveling again. And if you give me a second, I'll pull them up. I think I memorized it. It's 252, I think 652. So 252,652 people came into the Americas as slaves. And that's from your so-called transatlantic slave trade. However, that doesn't, math is a little different, because over the course of 350 years, you're dividing somewhere like 55 to 60 slaves per colony per year. And that includes white people as well that ended up being the slave masters once, and their indentures and their terms of servitude was to end. So they ended up owning slaves, which were the Indian slaves that were then, being enslaved as well. Even as some places changed the laws saying that now it's not okay to enslave Indians. They never changed their race back. They had already tainted the families and misclassified them. So they certainly didn't go back to correct them, to say, wait a minute, those people, you know what, we blacked them out, we Negroed them out back in 1750s. They're actually Indians, and they didn't go back and reverse the curse. They didn't go back and do it. And we're the descendants of the people that they didn't correct it. And not only that, there's these different documentations that these people that are pretending to be the American Indians are not going to be able to attach themselves to. So can you imagine all of these white people that are going to have to sift through these records now, where they were politically comfortable since the 70s, during the Nixon administration, when they started to re-register again. They were significantly comfortable. We had the Crying Eyes Cody commercials and all of these things, to where they're now giving you the propaganda of what specifically a Native American or American Indian is supposed to look like, as they hijacked the civil rights movement, right? Shortly thereafter, it didn't even last 90 days, as far as I'm concerned, before that was hijacked. And then with that being said, now here we are politically shut out. We're the Indians by blood, and they're Native Americans by membership. We're kinship, they're membership. And now this is a legitimate claim that we have, because they not only are they living off of the trust that was set aside for us, but they've made themselves the beneficiary, they've the trustee, they are just everybody all in the mix. And we can't favor one side over the other. They were accepting money from the Union and accepting money from the Confederates as well. And they had backdoor plans to remove themselves from here. And if you look in some of the text, and I think if when we get to part 3, I'd like to go into the Confederate and Union portion of some of the damage in between that actually helped Franklin and Armfield and these other different enslavers perpetuate it. While it looks like the abolitionists are against slavery, they're actually doing favors to the people that are getting jammed up because they were a part of the Confederacy. Quite interesting tales to tell when it comes to unpacking all of this.
I think it's really important when you're bringing up the statistics of what they're counting as slaves. One of the chief contributors of that website, the Emory website.
Yes, Emory University.
Right. They're one of the sources of that database there. And one of the key contributors of it, in specifically dealing with the internal slave trade, admits that he uses false information in order to push his agenda. That is so reckless and irresponsible and flimsy that how can you be one of the main sources of thousands and thousands of these voyages? We're talking about 8,000 of the voyages he's responsible for. And he's using such flimsy information that it's insulting. Can I show you an example of that, cousin? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And tribe out there, can I show y'all an example of this flimsy information? Is that okay? Can I get some flames up in the chat if y'all want to see what they're using for this Emory University so y'all can see it with your own eyes? Okay.
Okay. Fireballs in the chat, y'all.
Yeah. Let's get it lit up. So let's see what they're using, because what they say is they have firsthand documentation, right, that they want to apply to this. So let's see how they justify the numbers that they're giving to the public. Now, this is academia that's doing this now, mind you. Let's see what it says. With these facts, let's break it down. Let's go in. Okay. Bring up these facts. So it's going to be breaking down into 3 different parts. This person is Greg O'Malley. Again, Greg O'Malley is the source of the Inter-America Emory statistics. Let's see what he says here.
The filth, the rampant illness, the terrible mortality. Roughly 1 in 5 people who boarded slave ships on the African coast did not survive the journey across the Atlantic. We knew a fair bit about that. The scale of the intercolonial slave trade, I would suggest, though, reminds us that the Middle Passage was just one phase in a longer journey for many. As awful as the Middle Passage was, it's only part of the story. Within Africa, people endured long journeys just to reach the coast and the slave ships that carried them to the Americas. And then in the Americas, many people endured further journeys soon after surviving the transatlantic slave trade. One rare survivor managed to write about the experience, Olaudah Equiano, pictured here, and he described the transition from the transatlantic to the intercolonial slave trade in this way. He said that he landed in Barbados originally.
I want to pause this right quick, because this Equiano, he admits, is one of the main sources that he uses in his research. So let's go back and listen to what he has to say.
And described awaiting a second shipment to Virginia in, quote, a merchant's yard, where we were all pent up together like so many sheep in a fold, end quote. And he said that this layover lasted, in his memory, a few days. I believe it could not be above a fortnight. And the significance of this kind of quick turnaround, I think, is that it's crucial to understand that captives embarked on these intra-American journeys, often still reeling from the Atlantic crossing. They were sick, they were malnourished, often traumatized. And the conditions on these intra-American vessels were again appalling. They typically involved fewer captives on board, but the ships were also much smaller, and they were often crowded with trade goods. So the conditions were terribly cramped. We don't have many ship plans from this time period. It's not the way ships were constructed from written plans, generally speaking. But I did find a letter from one Virginia merchant writing to another merchant and describing a vessel that he wanted to have constructed for trade between the Caribbean and Virginia. And
so we just got done listening to Equiano, which is one of his main sources, eyewitness person, of coming from Africa to the Americas.
His name's Charles Stewart.
So for him to use Equiano as a source, what we're going to do is now take it to the 105 of this. So let's take it to the 105, because after he gives his presentation, they then have the question and answer period. And there's a sister here that's asking him the question to put a little bit of, do a little bit of probing. And then let's see what he has to say or what he has to admit later on in the same presentation. Let's see what it says.
I think I was thinking about the images as holistically as your question is asking me to think about them, but rather thinking about images to illustrate a particular point at a particular moment, right? What image can I use in this moment? And the Meynell image that you point to, you're quite right to point out that it's a little bit decontextualized the way I've used it there. That was a watercolor done. I think it's a watercolor. It might be an oil painting. I think it's a watercolor. But in any case, it's done on a captured slave ship in the 19th century that was taking people to Brazil. So it was actually a transatlantic vessel, not one of these intra-American vessels. And it's done in a slightly later time period than most of what I was talking about today. The reason that I use that particular image actually is because it's somewhat unique. It's in being less schematic. The famous image of the slave ship Brooks that people have seen, it's on the cover of virtually every slave trade, book published, and it gets used a lot of. It's a schematic image of a sort of cross section of a ship showing all the people lined up to show how people were packed aboard these vessels is the most common image that's used, but it's very sort of impersonal. It's a diagram rather than an image of people.
What he's admitting here is that diagram that they keep on showing of people nut the butt and all packed in there, that is fake. That's what he's explaining, because it's not showing any of the food, the water, the other material. So they just basically showing you packing in a bunch of people. And what he's admitting to is that image is fake. Let's continue and see what he has to say. Again, this is fair use.
But also, it's only people. And the Meynell image shows people sitting on top of barrels. And so I was using the image in the particular part of my talk that I was to capture that sense of the relationship between slave trading and the commerce in goods, right? That these people are being put into the holds of ships alongside trade goods, sharing space with those goods, but also in the mindset of the traders and empires, these two modes of commerce are very much entangled. We like to think of them as separate, right? That was the great victory of the abolitionists, is that they convinced us that these were two separate things. People could not be moved as trade goods. That's inhumane. It's murderous. And in a way, I think that mindset shapes, for good reasons, the way we look at the slave trade now. But to understand what's happening and what's at stake for the merchants and the profits gained, I think it's actually important to recover that sense of how, for them, this was all integrated, and they saw one kind of trafficking facilitating another. So that's why I particularly brought that image in. And I think the newspaper ads and things like that are quite striking too, because they often, they capture that sense as well. And that often the advertisements, especially from these intercolonial trafficking ventures, they advertise people in the same advertisement that they'll say they have rum for sale or sugar for sale or other kinds of imported goods. And it captures for me this sense of the way slave trading was integrated into the economy in a way that I think makes much more far-reaching the implications of what was gained at the expense of enslaved people's freedom. So connecting to like reparations debates and things like that, I think the implications of this are really important for thinking about the scale to which the American economy was built around slavery. It's not a side story to the story of American history or the history of the American economy. It's fundamental to it. So for me, there are very profound connections between these issues of reparations and this phase in particular of the slave trade.
Yeah, and of course historians are, I'm thinking of Catherine Hall and Peter Hudson and lots of people who are doing work now also specific.
So now he's about to come up on that source that he was using earlier in his lecture. So we'll get to that part. These people, they white explain so fucking long, but he's about to get to the point of the source that he was using. And let's see what he has to say, what's going to be revealed from her question to his answer.
Specifically to think about that. I just have a small follow-up, which is that you were talking about historians and how you deal with the record and how you deal with the archive, but I'm also interested always in the question of not speculation. That Marissa Fuentes, of course, was trained by Saidiya Hartman partly, and so she also has that in her training. But even without speculative relationships to history, there's a question of the error or of the veracity of the documents, or the missing nature of documents, tax frauds, exaggerations, all kinds of things that which we know humans do. So how that's one of the reasons why so many scholars who are not historians but come from a Black studies perspective where we pay attention to this history tend to have conversations that go beyond always what's in the record, to partly try to talk about subjectivity, to talk about ways in which knowledge is supported, which things look like knowledge, which things look like a record. So I just wondered if you would say a little bit more about what you did find, or places where things felt a little strange to you, or how you deal with the question of the veracity or the reliability of the archive.
So just to make it clear, she's asking him, since it was done on the black market and there's no records, how are you coming up with these records that you present to the people, the records that you feed to Emory University, the information that you're sharing? That's what she's asking him. He's about to admit that he makes the shit up. And you're going to see the lady in red basically giving him the green light to, oh yeah, this is perfectly fine. We'll go and play it.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a number of things popping in my mind. I mean, one is that there's certain branches of this that are easier to study than others because of smuggling, right? So the French colonies, for example, like the Spanish, typically it was illegal, but they didn't grant exemptions for the slave trade in the same way. So they just barred all foreign commerce with their colonies. But there are sort of more descriptive sources where people describe smuggling between British colonies in the Caribbean and French colonies in the Caribbean as rampant. So we sort of know it was going on, but it can't be tracked in the same way with port records because it was all done illegally, and so people didn't leave the same kind of paper trails. And so for that, I relied on other kinds of sources. And then this was a place where I did do some of that kind of speculation that probably, makes some of the more traditional economic historians uncomfortable in thinking about. I tried to do some imagining of what does that mean for enslaved people to be smuggled across imperial borders rather than delivered through, the front door, so to speak. So thinking about, were people closed off in hidden parts of the ship, right? Literally and sealed in compartments, where people landed in the dark of night in out of the way harbors, and were there risks and dangers of that, of not having the infrastructure of ports. And so I on a very limited way, I tried at moments to sort of be a little bit speculative to get into some of those kinds of implications. Another thing that your comment made me think about is, I quoted Equiano in this talk, and use him extensively in the book as a point of evidence for this, one of these just very rare accounts where we have a person who may or may not have endured this trafficking as a captive, describing it in their own words, because of course Equiano's source is famously controversial, because there are a couple of documents outside of his narrative that suggest that he was born in the Americas rather than being born in Africa. To some degree, I sidestepped that issue because as an enslaved person in the Americas, he also he was owned by a merchant, not a plantation owner, and worked on some of these vessels as an enslaved sailor. And so some of what he describes actually is what he witnessed working in the trade rather than enduring it as a captive. And I would argue that what he describes, even if he wasn't born in Africa, I happen to still think he was, but even if he wasn't, he's describing enduring it as a captive from the perspective, it may be fictionalized, but of someone who was an eyewitness to the trade. And we have corroboration from that from independent sources. In fact, I've found in the port records that I've studied, the ship captain, the ship name of the ship that he says he worked on in his narrative, and see it moving enslaved people. So I've approached his source in that way, but I think it also is a great example to bring up. And I talk to students about this when I introduce them to this controversy over how should we see Equiano, is a lot of historians quickly have gravitated to these other sources. It's a baptismal record and some other kind of record that say that he was born in North America rather than having been born in Africa. And a lot of historians have been quick to then say, okay, well, we can't use his account of surviving the slave trade. And it's striking to me that there's also another source that says he was born in Africa, and it's his autobiography, right? Like, why is this baptismal record given much more credence than him saying, this is the story of my life, right? And I think it's, it's because he's an abolitionist, he's arguing against the slave trade. So people, want to argue that makes him suspect in some way, but.
Okay. All right. Are y'all with me as far as what we just saw?
In some kind of way. Yeah, it makes him a lot of suspect. I don't have them now, but I could definitely drop them on the community page when I find them, because I did have his baptismal records and several other records of his that I found in South Carolina, and also in the Spanish records as well. I also wanted to note that he did become a British citizen. He married him a nice peppermint patty Becky woman and had a nice life, comfortable off the proceeds of his published book in London. So that's that. But Emory University, the most comprehensive database on the slave trades in the entire world. And as Cousin Ish indicated, that guy is a major contributor. And look, you got to hit us with the Scooby-Doo face.
Yeah, and then let's listen to the words that he used. He said, this doctor, that he was imaginative is the word that he used. He also used the word speculative is the word that he used. He also said that Equiano was used extensively in his research. So this source, how can you ignore a person's baptismal record? If you're a kid and somebody gives you a baptismal record, that, so you're trying to say what, his parents are liars? Are you trying to say that the preacher that baptized them is a liar? First of all, I seen the baptism records. In fact, I got a copy of it for my book. They have people on the same baptismal record that says born in Africa. So there would be no big thing if he was born in Africa. But it says he was born in fucking South Carolina. Now, you're asking the question, this doctor here is asking the questions, what's going to be more relevant? His baptismal record, and he said it was multiple records because I have multiple records of it. There was also a ship log that said that he was born in Carolina. So it's multiple records showing that he was born in America. But he's saying, how does that compare to his autobiography? Well, didn't Alex Haley write an autobiography? Was it credible just because he said it was Kunta Kinte? No. So in other words, if you're a child, about 11 to 12 years old, or even younger than that was the other record, they're going to know where you're from more than you're going to know when you're growing up, because you're pushing your own agenda as a slave abolitionist. You're getting paid for that. So of course your baptismal record is a more viable record, because they were kidnapping people and making them, telling them that they came from another place. This is common sense. Welcome, Brother Jmar. So good to see you, brother. Let me give up the floor and give the king, give the chief the floor. I yield the floor. Thank you.
Hey, peace, everyone.
Brother, how are you?
I'm good. I think y'all hit on a perfect point that I like to segue into, especially dealing with, since we were sticking on the Angola plantation, Franklin Armfield Company. I would like to also share something concerning these two gentlemen and the slavery enterprise that they acquired or mustered up. So give me 1 second.
Yes, absolutely. If you haven't done so already, head on over to Urban Indian Heritage Society and subscribe. Please go cook it with Chief. She's reached 1,000 subscribers. Word around Campfire is she going live on Wednesday. So go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Go check that out. And Brother Jmar, whenever you are ready.
Can you just give me a quick reminder after I the share settings? How do I complete that?
I think it says present.
Yeah,
There's
then
a
share
button,
screen.
Yes.
And then there. Then it says entire window.
Or tab, or whatever tab you want to show.
Okay, all right, I got it. So this, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's coming up.
Yes, did you hit the share sound too? There's a little box for share sound. There's a little tiny box in there.
I believe I did.
Okay.
I believe I did. So you see this YouTube video? It says yes. Joshua Rothman.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
I'm going to start it right here. And it's only going to be a couple of minutes, about 2 minutes.
There's no audio on that, brother. It's a little tiny little box. I think it's on your left and near the bottom. It'll say share audio.
No, I'm not seeing it. I clicked that when I
you might want to stop the sharing and then go back to share it again, and then you'll see a little tiny box.
Go back and do it again. Yep.
Okay, I think I got it.
Yep, I see a microphone, so yeah, like volume.
Okay, let me just rewind it. All right.
an enslaved woman by
You hear
whom
that?
he had a child too.
Yes, yes.
Now, this sort of ruthlessness, this sort of indifference to decency, this could carry over into their dealings with white people too. Armfield, Franklin, and Ballard often referred to themselves as robbers and pirates. They reveled in being engaged in a business that almost everybody understood was more than a little bit dirty, and whose practitioners could benefit from a little bit of chicanery, a little bit of deceit, maybe even a little outright fraud. John Armfield, for example, thought himself very clever when he explained how he created stacks of fake bills of sale to avoid a Louisiana law that required certificates of good character for slaves imported to the state. How he would bribe Virginia officials to certify them. You can almost hear the three of them sort of cackling to themselves in letters about how they slowly but surely squeezed smaller traders out of business. Armfield, Franklin, and Ballard so enjoyed flouting basic standards of commercial civility, they often referred to the slave trade simply as the game.
So I'm going to stop it right there. And I'm going to stop the screen share. Now, what this Josh Rothman goes to explain is that through their letters they were sending back and forth to each other, they were laughing about forging bills of sale and something called, let me get it right, the verbiage, certificates of good character, right? Those certificates of good character, let me just go into this part, was something that they used to show that, you know, some of these slaves didn't come from the intercontinental slave trade that had already been abolished by that point. Now, the interesting thing is the saying how they had stacks of forged documents. Now, this now being or turning into one of the largest plantations in antebellum period, which transitions into one of the largest prison systems, I think is quite pronounced, and that connection is definitely needs more spotlight on. Now, what he also mentioned is how they were also bribing Virginia officials where their main head office was stationed at. So as we can see, they were trafficking, I won't even say enslaved people at this point. They're just trafficking people, you know, and I think I mentioned this last time, Isaac Franklin or Armfield is also the same company that was sold to another company called Price and Company, which was the company that stole Solomon Northam from up north.
And Birch, right? Price and Birch, I think it was.
Price and Birch, there we go. You know, so they basically followed the same practices as the previous company, Isaac and Frankel, and which is quite apparent in their letterheads back and forth that they were basically forging most of these documents. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
And Brother Jmar, I'm sorry, go ahead, cousin, finish.
I'm sorry, with the forging the documents, because if the slaves got into any trouble, then it would fall back on the master. You know how, like, if you get caught playing hooky from school, the truant officers bring you back, they want to blame your parents and bring your parents up on charges. This is where they had to be bonded. So they would do the fake bill of sales, of course, to make it look as if these are bona fide people that are work for hire. Also an indication that they were thinking that there was going to be something in exchange for their labor as they take this trip somewhere. So, you know, there was just a whole bunch of nonsense and cajolery. And when you bring up the name Birch that stole Solomon Northup, I want you to realize how close to Canada that is. They have Birchtown, and he's probably a descendant of the Canadians from the Revolutionary War where the Book of Negroes were entered at. right? So now those people that were with the Acadians and the Creoles that went to go establish Sierra Leone, a lot of them wanted to come back. And when they came back, they wanted to stay back here in America where they were unsuccessful before at any means. So this would include their mulatto children and even new Black Europeans that came here to assist in the calamity that ended up being what happened to us. The calamities that happened to us were perpetuated by both Black and white colonizers. And now they've made themselves a minority and they're running around here playing chief and got us looking like we the foreigner. Interesting.
I was going to ask Brother Jmar, is it possible that one satire piece that you had that was really powerful, that was dealing with those slave traders, is that something that you still have access to, brother?
Yes, I can. You would like for me to play that?
Yeah, that's like that was a really good piece right there.
Very good piece.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because I mean, what we're breaking down is how over and over and over again these people were falsifying records, and they were obscuring the records because they were, again, as we proved on series 1, they were taking free people and they were taking American Indians and enslaving them, and then had to give a justification of doing that. So even in the clips that we've been showing, France on one hand was saying that there were black codes and that there were rules and things, but on the whole other side, France was saying that slavery was illegal and outlawed, but yet you saw them applying the black codes and enslaving even the American Indians, is what we proved tonight. So you're seeing them going against their own policy. And in fact, there was a connection of a network between Britain and France and Spain that were still moving slaves, and they were using the excuse of moving product in order to circumvent the actual laws against slavery. So they would say, okay, we only have a couple of people on here, but what we're really moving is rum. What we're really moving is sugar. What we're really moving is wood and things like that. But on there were also slaves. So they were justifying their own country's illegal activities by pushing quote unquote legal products. This is a system that was taking place.
And all the colonizers was invited to a party that they was going to make sure the Indians wouldn't get wind of for at least 200 years. So they invented all sorts of distractions and people to sidetrack us and all of that, from paying attention to our own family details, the details of our own families that lead us to having this understanding of what it is that we're able to break down and disassemble now. Definitely hope y'all enjoying the show so far. Please like the video, share the video, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Urban Indian Heritage Society. We're going to get that channel up and running. We definitely got a lot of content. That's one thing you can say, we are never going to run out of content. Also, cousin, can you drop the link in the back chat to First Tribe Nation so I can run that for a few minutes as the banner going across? The absolute hottest publication of, look, I said it last year, but it's also currently still the hottest publication, First Tribe Nation. You guys, if you haven't subscribed already, go check that out. That's what you want to read. You don't need CNN. You need to see what's happening with the Indian in antiquity and current events. Awesome, awesome website. Awesome page, cousin. Yeah, so I can imagine some of the details. I don't know if you're getting any comments, but I've been sharing it in places where I know they did not want to see that DNA drop that you did. So if you get any negative comments, that's because I'm dropping it in places where they can't debunk it, so they might just get mad, you know.
Absolutely. So. I certainly do. Yep, and I embrace it.
Now, I found that video. I found that video. It's about 11 minutes and a half. I don't know if you want to play.
I know it was like a part of it. Yeah, it was like a certain part of it that you had played. I think it was like a few minutes of them when they were kind of
trying to find the
conversating.
good part.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And please, if y'all have not signed the petition, please feel free to sign and share the petition. The numbers are still growing on there as we're breaking the threshold of the 75, going on to the 8. So we're just moving up on that 75, going on to the 8, being very diligent and just doing the work. So thank you all for those who have signed and shared, and please continue as we keep on pushing forward. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. And please make sure you share it with your family. We don't care how many strangers you share it with. We hoping that you take that petition straight to your family. Those are the people that you have to work on. They related to the same Indians you are. Those are the people that we need. We don't need all these other fake tribes out here. We need our family to get over to this finish line, right? And that's the real deal. There's no way to put it. I don't care who you think you are. You think you're a freedman? Guess what, freedman? You need your freedman grandma and grandpa in order to coexist. To whatever it is that you feel that you're entitled to, you still gonna need your family. That's where it's at. That's where it's at. On whatever side of the spectrum you are, it's family first. And if you don't think so, we'll see you 7 generations from now wishing that you listened to us. Okay? And that's it. Irrespective of whether or not you're Indian, it's always going to be family first. Trust grandma and grandpa. Period.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Brother Jmar might be still trying to find the audio on there, and that's perfectly fine. I would like to explain, there were some parts of what Chief Warhorse was dealing with when she was talking with Tom, and she was dealing with Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was very pivotal as far as she was breaking down the relationships of how a lot of these tribes started getting established. You remember that part, Cousin Phoenix?
Yes, I do.
About,
yes,
Richard
I do.
Nixon.
Yep.
What was she kind of talking about with that aspect of it? Do you remember that? Because I know she's talking about.
I do know one particular part that stood out to me. That was around the bicentennial, and this is where Tom and other white people started to establish that they were going to create these tribes. They had passed down information from the people from the previous decades at the creation of the Dawes Commission and so on and so forth. They still had that information that they had already taken from different groups of people. So it's highlighted to showcase when they took the information and pictures of the family down by Chief and below that 31st parallel. But now that also, to me, gave me a great detail, especially when he mentioned Donald Trump. And to be honest with you, y'all know I rock with DT. Well, I used to until this video with Tom, because when I had to think about what it is that he was saying exactly, Trump was the first thing that he did was implement the five tribes, 6 tribes, the Thomasina Jordan tribes in Virginia. So that directly affects me. So did they just pull a flim flam over there right in front of our noses as we're discovering the fact that we are American Indian? It's just the timing. So now I have to wonder, how did they get no grandma killers? Trump said no grandma killers several times. So there's people that were hanging around us and looking for the information that we got in order to transfer it to the people that were looking to steal our identities.
And I would like to say that, part of that conversation of what she was talking about, not only the Donald Trump, but when she was talking about Nixon, that's the part where she was talking about tricky dick and stuff that he was doing. She was breaking that part of it down.
Gerald Ford did.
What was it? What about Gerald Ford?
What he didn't finish, Gerald Ford did.
Yes, exactly right. That's right. So Nixon there was representatives of the Negro race that had a relationship with Nixon. This is what we're talking about, the talented 10, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Boys. So Du Bois and the Boys, this is an article from 1960, September 14th. Suburb groups go with Nixon. The urban Negro, see that, has a phrase to describe those of his race who are lawyers, doctors, and members in other professions. They are called the talented 10 for the obvious reasons that about that percentage of the population holds that status. This talented 10th is largely for Nixon. Estimates put it as high as 75%, not lower than 60%. But what makes this interesting beyond its own significance is that it is applicable all the way across America. It is a feature of what is called suburbia, the children of foreign-born parents, those of minority groups, and those of parented classified as labor tend to identify themselves with the Republicans as they grow up, get jobs, marry, and have their own suburban homes. Identify with Nixon. Hence the fact that the talented 10th among Negroes identify with Nixon is no unusual phenomenon. It fits the overall pattern. What is important to both Kennedy and Nixon is what happens to the small business people, white and Negro. It goes further on to say it reveals to their great satisfaction that in addition to the aforementioned talented 10th, the small Negro businessman or woman, the barbers, the beauticians and grocers, etc., are tending to identify with Nixon. The talented 10th was the group established by W.E.B. Du Bois saying that Black people can't think for themselves. Black people as a whole, they're absorbed as colored people. So that would be the American Indians too. You can't think for yourselves and we'll think for you. We'll be the 10% of the population that will represent the Negro people and speak on their behalf in their best interest. This is also one. Atlanta, 1898, Atlanta, Georgia, December 4th. I am well aware that what I'm about to say will not be popular with my people, nor the talented 10th of my people. This was in 1898. Furthermore, as we go down to this talented 10th notes, let's see how the people thought about the talented 10th, because we're going to deal with, again, these people have put themselves in a position to speak on behalf of all the people. Nobody voted them in. So this is what the people thought about the talented 10 and what they have to say about it. And these articles are actually being placed up on my website. If you go into the forum section, you'll see these articles. All of them have the dates on it also. But this is what it says. And then we'll go to Brother Jmar's also so he can do that drop. Okay. So the talented 10th, W.E.B. Du Bois. Let's see what it says. Okay, here it comes. This is George Schuler, Views and Reviews. It says here, this is in 1934. What is true, the alien minorities, bourgeoisie, is likewise true of the Negro bourgeoisie. On one hand, we have a few who, endowed with social vision, discern that if the colored brother and sister could be saved, they must be assimilated, integrated, merged with the surrounding population as soon as possible, not only culturally, but physically, that any policy likely to retard this process of the Americanization is dangerous, if not suicidal. On the other hand, many of our so-called talented 10th are forever, often perhaps through the ignorance, advocating policies, sponsoring programs, leading rabid, ultra racial campaigns calculated to land colored folks into the same morass that has engulfed the untouchables of India for 2,000 years. Take down the speech of one of the ultra radicals, erase the word Negro and Black, and insert the word Caucasian, Aryan, Anglo-Saxons, and white, and the address would be read with enthusiasm by the imperial wizard Evans of Wilford Goring. He's comparing them to the Ku Klux Klan. So what I'm saying is that they did not have the hearts and the minds of the people. They put themselves in position to make deals with the politicians. And when you start asking the questions, what was happening during the civil rights era. How did it go from being an American Indian Act into a Negro Act, into what you started to see, the Stokely Carmichael and stuff? That was when it was being identified. These talented 10th people, those niggas was making deals behind the closed doors. I yield the floor.
Yes, and yes. Thank you so much for that, Cousin Ish. Backdoor deals, man. Wake it up. Wake it up. You ready, Jmar?
Yes, yes. I would like to also mention that, studying these slave codes that quote unquote turn into the black codes. They had a system in which they required in certain places a yearly agreement for work. Let me see. With the vagrancy laws, basically. So a person could be arrested or fined and bound out for a term of labor if he was unable to pay certain fines. And these codes for free people of color to sign an annual labor contracts. Now, if they were found without these labor contracts, they could be then fined. And if they couldn't pay these fines, be in prison. What I also encountered is a lot of these quote unquote catchers would also get a profit from the people that they capture, which can show you a clear, how do you say, conflict of interest on the catcher and these people that are just being trafficked and captured. So I'm going to share this video, the satire aspect of it. And the person that is represented is supposed to be Franco, and he has this, gold chain on, and he's all, debonair, he's smoking a cigar. But I'm going to play a couple of minutes of it. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Franklin and Armfield.
You make it full size.
Biggest firm for importing domestic slaves in the USA. While we have markets in Natchez, Mississippi, New Orleans, and all the way west as Texas. Now, my partner, Mr. Armfield, he runs the Alexandria plant, and it's got 2 stockades for men and women, eating quarters, and even a hospital. Now, I run the Southwest markets all the way to Dallas. It's a good, steady business. Yes, sir. Why, I've got a friend in Memphis, a Mr. Nathan Bedford Forrest. He's been making, I think it's around $96,000 a year since 1850.
I'm going to stop it right there on that point to highlight a second point, learning about this firm company, Isaac and Frankel. Let me just stop the screen share. And that it mentioned that they had a lot of contacts in almost every state leading down to the South with agents on their payroll. He mentioned even markets far west as Dallas. Okay. His partner, stationed in Virginia, had literally a traffic highway leading all the way to the New Orleans, Louisiana, and far Texas area. Now, they would do this either 2 ways: by your coffles, where they would march people overland, but they also would do this through their ships. They had a number of ships that they had bought that they were actually transporting these people from up north down south, And they actually turned it even into a bigger profit when they started to then bring goods from the South to the North with these ships after they dropped off these enslaved people. One other quick video I do want to show, going back to the first video, and it's talking about some of the heinous practices that Isaac and John partook in. So I'm just going to share my screen again. How's that?
It's not up yet, brother.
To report on the
Okay, it's coming in.
professional. He opened up the doors of the Duke Street headquarters. Guests a drink. Played the refined Southern gentleman as he explained how well his firm treated its cargo and avoided separating families. Along the same lines, when nearly 24 slaves in Isaac Franklin's possession died in Natchez during lest the sight of the corpses publicly careful. But they had no illusions about how to treat the enslaved if you wanted to be successful.
Try it again, Jmar. Try
It's
it
not
again.
sharing?
There you go.
Sweet
There you
talk
go.
of it.
Share it now.
In jail. But all you have to do is look at the ship manifests. Look at the other records. They make it plain. His claims about not separating families, they were lies, outright lies. He and his partners separated enslaved families all the time, and they did not think much about it. Franklin buried dead slaves at night, but he dumped them in a ravine so haphazardly that they washed to the surface during a rainstorm. And then he joked about it in a letter, writing, "The way we send out dead Negroes at night and keep dark is a sin to Crockett." And sin to Crockett was a Davy Crockett reference. It was sort of, isn't this a terrible thing what we do? Arguably, this disregard for the basic dignity of enslaved people, this was just something the company did. And nothing speaks more to the depravity of the partners than how they sexually exploited Black women in their custody. Isaac Franklin and his nephew like to joke about raping enslaved women. They sometimes referred to themselves in relation to female slaves with a euphemism for their genitals as one-eyed men. They sized up seemingly every young enslaved woman they had on offer for her potential as a sex slave. And that, of course, was known by yet another of the trade's euphemisms as a fancy. When a woman held by John Armfield in Alexandria claimed in a courtroom that he had ill-treated her, everybody knew what that meant. So relentless was the reduction of female slaves to objects of the sexual desire of white men, it is almost unsurprising to see Franklin suggest to Ballard in a letter in 1834 that maybe they ought to open a brothel of enslaved women for company employees as a business perk. Or that Franklin, who was widely rumored, kept numerous enslaved women for his personal sexual wants, including one who he had sold, along with the child he had by her when she became inconvenient. And that transaction established a pattern for the firm. Rice Ballard did the same thing. And I've found some evidence suggesting that Armfield dispatched with an enslaved woman by whom he had a child too.
So I'm going to stop it right there. Now, a lot of what is he describing is letters being sent back and forth from Isaac to John, and also their partner, Ballard. Ballard gets later added to their company as a partner, I believe in the late, about 1840. but he comes later in the picture. But all these conversations that they're having is through letterheads, joking about raping, these colored women or these Negro women. Let's be precise, because when you start to look up Armfield and Franklin Armfield, a lot of the advertisements displayed are specifically talking about young Negro women and young Negro boys. Specifically, no real mention of Africans at all in any of their slave advertisements. Let's just point that out there straight. You can look it up now. They have plenty of, their advertisements still around, and it only specifically states Negro as the caricature of who they were selling and trafficking. So it's funny because you sent me something, Phoenix, talking about you found another person named Isaac Frankel. So I wanted to play that video because it talks about how both of them were engaged in having sexual affairs with these enslaved women and selling them and their children off. And I'll land on that.
Yeah, and I had found a petition where Isaac Franklin, who was a person of color, wanted to remain free, right? He was having a hard time and he has petitions in the places where these all Franklin and Armfield offices are. It starts in Virginia, and then it ends goes to Louisiana, and then also Nacogdoches, and he has a Texas application as well, where he finally ends out in Texas. So I guess he was, it didn't work the same for him there, but he has the exact same name as Isaac Franklin. And we know that he fancied the women there. And of course, the separation, and some of those children also were enslaved. So there was a period of time that man was enslaved, and he was trying to remain free as he moved into another jurisdiction.
Yeah, and you accurately also point out that this was their specialty, was the intra-American slave trade. I know last time we were dealing with, the Hubbard family line that was dealing with the other side, but this specialty here was that intra-America slave trade. Very accurate, and they were the monsters of that aspect of the slave trade for sure.
And all throughout the 1700s, which is interesting, where they're getting the slaves from Virginia, they're absolutely taking American Indians specifically, because you couldn't bring any slaves from any other place. You couldn't even bring a slave from North Carolina into Virginia, from Pennsylvania, from Washington, D.C., from Maryland, any of the bordering states into Virginia, as so were North Carolina and other states as well. So it's really going to be a lot of information that helps you track people down, at least to a general so-called state, so-called colony, or what have you, because of the laws that are in place where they're being kidnapped from or taken from into another jurisdiction to work. So there's going to be some sort of litigation in the new place that indicates that, one, they would have had to have either a fake bill of sale or something indicating that these people were free and clear, they were of good character, and they weren't going to come in and destroy the place, right? Or get other people riled up and ruin this good thing of slavery that we have here. We'll be getting this money, right? Because that was really what the thing was. And then there's also going to be the placement of the mulatto children, also removing them from the home place, right? So that they can start these endeavors, and then also marry foreign women and perhaps into an Indian tribe, so they can perpetuate the same madness that we've been seeing for the last 200 years.
Absolutely. Brother Jmar, you about to say something?
Yeah, it quickly skipped me. Maybe it'll come back to me.
I know we're talking about the DeWolfs, and we're doing a comparison with the intra-American slave trade, if that reminds you of something.
Yes. Okay. What's specifically interesting, when the guy that I previously played, Joshua Rothman, he's explaining how when they come about starting in their company, it is at a specific time where it is one of the biggest booms when it comes to slave trading and the whole start of the plantation foundation system in America, which is only after the ending of the whole so-called transatlantic slave trade. So the biggest boom, the most wealth, where you get most of these largest slave owners, is during antebellum period, where it was specifically the domestic slave trade, right? Which points to the fact that the biggest boom was built around foundationally trading or moving people that were already on the land to other places of the land, not from across the water where you got your biggest boom. It was from people that were already here that they were just moving to other parts of the country.
Yeah, and it lines up perfect with, again, the moving out of indigenous populations from their ancestral homelands by hook or crook, and having to get those lands occupied by other European coming fresh off the boat. So all of this was happening at the same time. The influx of people going out, the influx of squatters coming in, and the need for that land to be, taken care of. But the laws were saying internationally, you can't get these people in. So what were going to be their substitutes? What you were accurately showing tonight, the falsifying of documents, what we've been showing all night long as far as the falsifying of the information, even the sources that they're using. Those numbers are fake. Those numbers are fake all the way around, from what you're able to see online, from the logs, from the ships, all of that information. That stuff is falsified in big, major ways.
And we also have the instance as they're moving people through Franklin and Arkville, transporting them from one side to the Midwest, the Mid-Southwest. What they're also doing is having a bunch of immigrants come in, and they're changing their names. And this is how Beulah May, Gretchen Schwarzenheimer ends up being Beulah May Jenkins, as they remove them from the East Coast and bringing them in towards the Midwest, into Louisiana, into Texas, and into Arkansas. They now have people coming in through Ellis Island and other places, points east, that are now using and fraudulently obtaining our family names, right? And then on the flip side, for the last seven generations, at least since the first Pan-African Conference in 1900, we've been told that these are slave last names. Don't look at them. And that came from kinfolk. And as we were told to hate our country, we didn't participate in polity and civics. As we were told these were slave last names, we certainly didn't pick up genealogy and take it very seriously, right? Until now. And that was their opportunity, as we're getting sidetracked and they're using so-called Black people as propaganda pieces in order to perpetuate, basically block us from being interested in getting to the bottom of our family history in detail. So we took on this other persona, and all we heard was slave this and slave that. And as it turns out, there's so much different details to our family history that we didn't dip into. So now when we tell the fascinating details, it looks like we don't know what we're talking about, and everybody else that's the lie are the ones that are correct. And that's got to stop. And this is why we encourage everyone to do their genealogy, irrespective of whether or not you are a Black European or an American Indian, a Polish man, a Chinese man. It is imperative for you, in order to not be oppressed, that you know what your family history is. It is imperative to you to not be labeled a colonizer by the people like us that want our voice heard. We're home already. And we don't have to be silent anymore. We don't have to hide who we are. We're not going to get strung up from a tree for saying that we're Indian now. So I know that it still bothers people very, very much. It bothers them very much that we self-identify, we stand 10 toes down on it, and also that we are correcting the things that they said about our ancestors. So when they talk about certain things that we know that are uniquely attached to our people as far as culture and heritage is concerned, we're going to go get that back. It's Operation Cornbread. Had to let the Africans know today in this battle group, corn braids are not African at all, right? I had to remind him. He said, oh, yeah, your family's eating greens and sweet potatoes. They African. And I'm like, you think that that food is African? That's how far gone it is that we have to correct them on everything. The beauty industry, how we had things to straighten our hair. We can go from kinky, silly, you show is ugly, to Lola Falana, you show is beautiful in less than 20 minutes. We had our processes, the straightening combs, the beauty industry. Most of our free men of color are entrepreneurs, and they made their money being barbers, and they were the best barbers in the country. Best barbers in the world come from here in America. Okay, so there's so many things that have to come back in order for us to tell the truth.
Tell the truth. And when we ask that question, how white people became the minority, that's what we're presenting. We're showing you how that process took place. A lot of the shifting around the records then made the colonizer the chief. So when you look at these tribes that go around today, you're the colonizer. How is it that all the people that have the melanation aren't even in existence anymore, but yet all of the colonizers are now sitting in the chief roles? Well, that's what we're showing you. We're showing you all the receipts that were being falsified, all of the ship records that were being falsified, and them putting themselves into the narrative. That's exactly what's being presented to you in this series. So I hope that y'all are getting a lot of important information from the series. Again, we're here providing the sources and here to make sure that you're able to obtain the information, as we're still working very diligently on your behalf to deliver with you, to you this information. So I hope that you're satisfied with the information being presented thus far.
Jmar, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we close out, brother? And can we tell the people to look forward to a part 3, guys?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
This drop is filled with critical information that spans decades and even centuries. So this definitely needs a part 3. Definitely down for it. And as we highlight these institutions that laid the foundation for what we considered our modern prison system, right? Case in point, Angola, which was a plantation of Isaac Franklin, right? Connecting history to current events to see that a lot of things haven't changed. The names, the people's names, may have changed, but it's the same system, right? Your slave codes are your black codes. Your black codes are the institutions that come out of your prison system nowadays. Your basic vagrancy laws, your loitering laws, and it shows in, Angola being known as one of the worst prisons in America, right? And then the history of it being so egregious, it's like, what has really changed? Nothing really. Just been relabeled. They made it legal under being convicted of a crime, but it's still slavery at the end of the day. I mean, they still have some of those prisoners picking on plantation fields.
Facts.
With hoes and rakes out there sweating. So it's no change. I believe
and security guards on horses.
Oh my goodness, they use them for the jobs that nobody else wants to do. They think that they may go to a different ethnicity group, but no, they put out fires in rural areas. They do all sorts of things. They train pets for people with disabilities. They have all different.
They put on a rodeo show.
The rodeo.
They put on a rodeo show.
Decades and decades of that Angola rodeo. And let's talk about that, because we can talk about who the people are of Angola, right? Now, keep in mind, you could be passing from going from Alabama to go see your grandma Jessie in Texas and never make it to Texas because you get caught up in something and they arrest you and you get taken away for 40 years into Angola. Oh, how your life could change, right? Down that federal road. Very, very serious. We're going to talk about Federal Road. We're going to talk about the Trail of Tears, and how Armfield and Franklin is still attached into that too. How the Confederates, how the colonizer, how the descendants of the Confederates and colonizers became chief.
And we're going to pull a file on some of those pale chiefs too. We're going to show y'all firsthand these pale chiefs that are sitting in those chairs today. I told you it was coming for you. I told you that.
Shout out to Chief Warhorse. Looking forward to the live she's going to do on Wednesday. Shout out to Tom Ackland. Tom, you helped us so much. You taught us so much. We're very grateful, very appreciative, and we're still going to be chopping down those 2 videos. And then as we're getting, privy to others that are just as fascinating. But Tom, we ain't done with you. You gave us something to talk about. Lots of content coming from out of that. I'm super excited. I want to thank you, cousin, Brother Jmar. Thank y'all so much. I can't wait till we do this again. We got the part 3, and we definitely going to talk about the rodeo. Make sure we talk about the rodeo, and do some more details on Franklin. We pull out some of the receipts because he went from, I ain't going to say shit to sugar, but he went from very modest to multi-millionaire before he died, and how that Ackland lady was directly tied in with the Rothschilds. So we know that they were present. They were here. Andrew Jackson's issue and concern with Nathan or Nathaniel Rothschild and some of the nefarious things that were going on, how they sparked the War of 1812, how they stuck around a couple of generations and helped get the Civil War shaken so that they can destroy the currency. We're going to talk about all of that. We'll be bringing that up. I want to thank everybody for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? You know what it is. It's a beautiful day in Indian country. Turn up, y'all. Chapi Salachike.